In this second section of the video lecture, we're going to continue talking about the brainstem, but we already talked about the medulla oblongata. Now we're going to move a little bit higher from there, and we're going to talk about the pons. Remember, pons is a Latin root that means bridge. Why? Because it's the bridge between the medulla oblongata and the midbrain. So here in this slide, I'm just going to give you some generalities of this structure called the pons. So here you see that it's a bridge because it's connecting is in between the medulla oblongata and the midbrain, and is the main function here. The importance of the pons is that it's linking the cerebrum with other sections of the brain, like the medulla oblongata, the cerebellum, and the midbrain. And how it does it? Using these tracks, this bundle of axons. In addition, we talked that in the medulla oblongata, you have some cranial nerves. Here, there are also some cranial nerves that originate from the pons, and here they will be from number 5 to number 8. Okay, so to recap, I already know that you already know the location of the pons, and I already told you that this structure is important because it's linking different parts of the brain by using tracks. In addition to that, I told you that 4 out of the 12 cranial nerves will originate from the pons, and it will be from number 5 to number 12. So these one are the ones that belong exclusively to the medulla oblongata, and this one are the 4 of the pons. So they share this one, the vestibular, the number 8. It will be shared, so it will have just a branch in the pons. Okay, so we finished with the generalities of the pons. Now we can go into the specifics. And we are going to go into the specific of the functions. So similar to the medulla oblongata, we have neurons that are working together, the sums of the neurons that form a nucleide, and those nucleides have a particular function. Those functions of the nucleide are associated with 4 pairs of cranial nerves from number 5 to the 8. These are the cranial nerves that originate in the pons, and now I'm going to tell you some information related to the function of each one of those. In your textbook, you will find more detailed information. So here, the first one, let me find the pen here. The trigeminal nerves that is the number 5, is the one that is in charge. So number 5 is in charge of providing the motor impulse for chewing. The number 2, that is the abducens, are in charge of providing the motor impulses to control the eyeball movement. And finally, the number 3 here, it will be the facial nerves, that are the pair of nerve number 7, are in charge of the secretion of the saliva, as you can see here, the secretion of tears, and different facial expressions. So finally, the 4th pair of nerves that come from the pons is the number 8, that is shared with the medulla oblongata, and in this case it provides the motor impulse for the vestibular apparatus, that is related to the hearing, and also related to the balance and equilibrium. So now that we understand the function of the pons, we can focus on the structural components, and there are too many structural components. The basal pons, or ventral region, and the second area, the second component, is the pontine tegmentum, or dorsal region. While the dorsal region is very similar to other regions of the brainstem, that you have ascending tracts that are sensory and descending tracts that are motor, the basal pons have different structures. So for example, this one form a large synaptic relay station. So let's write it's a relay station. And in addition to that, it has scattered gray centers. And we will talk about this in a second. They are called pontine nuclei. And these pontine nuclei are the largest precerebellum nuclei, and they are in charge of coordinating and maximizing the efficiency of the voluntary motor output throughout the body. Okay, so in your textbook you will find more information, but so far I am going just to summarize all the things that I told you for this slide. So we're talking about the structural components of the pons, and there are two major regions. Yeah, so one that is the ventral region and the other one that is the dorsal region. In addition to that, I will be happy if you remember that the ventral region of the pons has a large synaptic relay station and, and consists of a gray centers called the pontine nuclei. And this pontine nuclei is the largest precerebellum nuclei and is involved in the voluntary motor output. In addition, I told you that the dorsal region of the pons is more similar to the other regions of the brainstem, that it contains ascending and descending tracts, and it also has all these cranial nerves. So the last section that we are going to talk is the role of the pons and in general of the brainstem in regulating the respiration. So just to summarize, I told you that there are many functions in which the pons is involved. So if somebody has a stroke that occurs in the pons, it will have problems balancing, it will have loss of coordination, it will have problems, difficulty articulating words, and there are many. So remember this area. It relays nerve impulses related to voluntary skeletal muscle movements from the cerebrum to the cerebellum. So it's connecting those areas. In addition to that, it also contained the pontine respiratory center group, so it helped to regulate the deep respiration. And we will talk about that, this control of respiration, and we will discuss that in more detail in your second anatomy and physiology course next semester, but I'm going to show you a schematic that appears in your textbook. So this diagram is taken from your textbook from the chapter of respiration. And here, if you remember, we have this pontine, and in this case, it has the respiratory group. So if you remember, we're here studying the pons. There is a ventral region and a dorsal region, and the pontine is here. This one interact with the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory groups of the medulla oblongata. In particular, the ones of the medulla oblongata will, if you see here, these two arrows, they will be in charge of controlling the intercostal muscles as well as so here is the intercostal muscles as well as the diaphragm. So they are very important in the respiration. So I just told you that both the pons and the medulla oblongata are working. Here, this information is mainly about the medulla oblongata that has two collection of neurons that are the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory group, and they regulate the diaphragm, and they also regulate the muscles in the external intercostal, and both in this way is regulating the deep breath. Okay, with this, we finish the pons, and now we can move to the final structure of the brainstem. So now let's finish with this third component of the brainstem. So I remind you, we already talked about the medulla oblongata, then we move into the pons, and now we move even a little bit superior to the pons, that is the midbrain. That is the third structure that we're going to talk about. Okay, so far we have been talking that in the previous chapter we talked that the impulses come from the spinal cord, then they move into the brainstem, and they have to cross three different regions. So here, the first one is the medulla oblongata. The third one here, it will be the pons, and finally here, the one that we are just talking right now. This one, the fourth one, it will be the midbrain. And in the following section, we will talk about the cerebellum, here the diencephalon, and finally at the end we will talk about the largest part of the brain, that is the cerebrum. And if you remember, there were three main vesicles of the brain when we talk about the development of the brain, and it was divided into forebrain, midbrain here, and the hindbrain, and it has different vesicles, and they subdivide and they then fall and form this structure. So this is where those names come from. And so you already know the location of the midbrain. And regarding the structure, you are going to find again tracks that are motor, that will be descending. And here, for example, there are some examples, and you have here, for example, this one, the corticospinal, so that come from the cortex and go through the spine, and also sensory. So you will have this sensory that are ascending, and here you will see some examples that we will talk more in detail later in the following slides, or you can find more information in your textbook. So here I told you about the location of the midbrain. So you already know where it's located, and that is superior to the pons, and is in between the pons and the encephalon. So it's the number 4 there. And I also already told you the structure from a very general perspective. It contains also these two tracks, yeah, motor and sensory track, as we have been talking before. Now in this slide we're going to talk about the three main parts of the midbrain. And the first part is found here, is the tectum, and is located in the posterior region. The second area is here the tegmentum, that is more, here we can say that is in the middle, yeah, the middle region. And finally, the third region. So here is put second, and here in the third region, these two regions are called cerebral peduncles. Okay, that this one will be located in the anterior region. Okay, so now in the tectum, we have the inferior and superior colliculi. And we will talk about that in a second. They are in charge of the movement of the head, trunk, and eyes. In the tectum, in the tegmentum, in the middle, you will find a lot of different sections, yeah, different structures there. You will find the red nuclei, you will find the substantia nigra, you will find the reticular formation. Finally, in the third component, in the cerebral peduncles, you will find different tracks. Yeah, so like the cortical spinal bundle of axons, they will be located there. And there will be other tracks there. So let's put an S here just to make sure. So to recap, I told you that there are three main parts of the midbrain: tectum, second tegmentum, and the third one, the cerebral peduncles. In your textbook, they mainly highlight this one and this one. And they talk a lot about all the different structures that are located here in the mid area, in the middle area. So in the tegmentum, just to summarize, so they were located in the posterior part of the midbrain, and then contain the nuclei for the superior and inferior colliculi. In the tegmentum, that they will be located in the middle, in the center of the midbrain, they will contain many structures. Here I'm just going to write the red nuclei and the substantia nigra, and later we will talk about other ones. Finally, in the cerebral peduncles, you're going to have, is going to be in the anterior part, and is going to consist of axons of different tracks. Now in the following slide, I'm going to show you the different names that are of the structures that are located there. I just wanted to give you a very general view of how to understand what is happening in the midbrain. So here you can see again the same diagram that I showed you before. Now I reveal the names there that are as they are shown in your textbook, except for some of them do not make this explanation too complicated. The main idea here is to tell you that in addition to these three regions, we have here cranial nerves, structures like that, and here, for example, the one cranial nerve that you can see in this diagram, the oculomotor, is located here. You cannot see the other, there is the trochlear in this diagram, but so 2 out of the 12 cranial nerves are located here or originate in this area. In addition to that, you have several structural regions that they are discussed in more detail in your textbook. I'm just going to list it here and show you where they are located. So we already talked about the cerebral peduncles that, as we talked before, they are in that area. There is a lot of tracks, like the corticospinal tract. In addition to that, there is a region called the corpora quadrigemina that is here located in the tectum, and it contains both the superior colliculus and the inferior colliculus. And those two areas are important because they are in charge of coordinating movements. In addition to that, we have the substantia nigra here. And in the following slide, I will show you the functions. We also have the red nuclei that is located here. And here you have the medial lemniscus. And finally, one thing that we will talk at the end of this lecture, it will be the reticular formation. And with that one, we will finish the brainstem. So now I'm going to tell you some of the functions of some of these structures. I'm not going to cover all of them to not make this too long, but you can find that information in your textbook. So for example, I already told you that in the cerebral peduncles, what you're going to find is the tracks, the motor pathways that come from that area. In addition to that, I told you that we have in this area, the corpora quadrigemina, and you have the two superior and inferior collicula, and there are multiple functions. One of them, for example, are the visual and auditory reflex. Finally, here you can see the two last ones, the substantia nigra, that is in charge of the subconscious control of skeletal muscle contraction. So here, for example, the posture and the balance, and remember this is subconscious. And finally, the red nuclei that is in charge of the control of a muscle movement. To finish this, okay, to finish the section of the midbrain, so I remind you, one of the first lectures, section of the lecture, we talked about that there were three vesicles during development. Yeah, if you remember, midbrain, forebrain, and hindbrain. And here we can see the functions. Yeah, so I just told you this area of the midbrain, I told you they're helping to regulate the movement and they process auditory and visual information. Yeah, so process of movement. And here in the hindbrain, so the brainstem plus this area of the cerebellum, it will be involved in autonomic functions. Yeah, and here, as we said before, relay of sensory information and coordination of balance and equilibrium. Yeah, well, these to have been in charge of regulating movement and autonomic functions. The forebrain has a different function here, where we're going to process sensor information, and it's going to help with reasoning and problem solving. Okay, this is very general, but I like to finish this section. Yeah, remind you that development is very important. And here, when you analyze the development, what happened in the beginning, you can understand also the functions. To finish the brainstem, now we're going to talk about the reticular formation that you can see it here in the diagram in this orange area. So it goes from the midbrain. Yeah, if you remember the development, it was called the mesencephalon, and it goes be through all the pons, medulla, so all the brainstem, and it goes even below a little bit here of the spinal cord. Uh, this is, reticular formation is a net-like structure that it can be found in the nuclei of the brainstem, and it has many neurons. So it will have a lot of functions that we will cover in the next slide. But remember, the reticular formation is a net-like structure that is located in the brainstem, and as is shown in the diagram, and have many nuclei. It is in the brainstem. It starts in the mesencephalon, yeah, that is the midbrain in the early stages of development, and it goes not only to the medulla, but it projects to the superior area of the spinal cord. So there are many functions. I'm just going to highlight three. One of them is, as you can see here, is helping to regulate muscle tone, and muscle tone is defined as the tension in a muscle at rest. So here you can see this is showing his muscle because the reticular formation is working well, and it's helping it to regulate his muscle tone. The other thing that the reticular formation is involved is helping the brain, yeah, alert the cortex of the brain that there are incoming sensory signals. And finally, the last one is related to sleep. Yeah, so it's responsible for maintaining consciousness and awakening it from sleep. And with this, we finish finally the brainstem. Now, in the next video lecture, we will move into the cerebellum and the encephalon, and finally the cerebrum.